Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see them, what's making the headlines with Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. As ever, though, let's start with the front pages. The Metro, I'm a Prime Minister, get me out of here. Headlines the Metro as Boris Johnson has been accused of running scared over sleaze allegations. The Eye focuses on the Prime Minister refusing to apologise over the sleaze row as he visited a hospital and missed the House of Commons debate. The Guardian quotes the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, who accused the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, of leading the Conservative Party through the sewers and trying to take down the standards watchdog for his personal interests. Daily Mail leads with an exclusive on a top Conservative MP being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds in a year for working remotely from the Caribbean. The Telegraph reports that more than 11,000 people caught COVID and died after being admitted to NHS hospitals for other reasons. The Financial Times leads on the UK and US officials signalling that interest rates in their countries are likely to rise as central bankers outline different responses to the global surge of inflation. And The Sun draws attention to behind-the-scenes moments of Strictly Come Dancing, or the couple, rather. Trying to read that one quickly. Didn't quite manage it. See if it's in your list later. But Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole are here from the Daily Mirror and The Sun, respectively. Welcome to both of you. So, Pippa, the Metro, get me out of here. Was this Boris booster jab moment in the diary or not? Everybody wants to know.
Well, we actually checked out with the hospital, thinking exactly that, Anna, earlier today, and gave them a call just to make sure that the meeting had been in the diary for some time, as Numbers 10 had told us. And it turns out that that was the case, that in fact it had been cancelled and rearranged on a couple of occasions because the PM had other engagements. You could argue that today's Commons debate on probity and standards in the House of Commons might have been another reason to delay it, so the PM could have stood at the dispatch box and represented the government and answered some of those many questions that MPs on all sides had. But no, he decided to stick with the plan and visit a hospital in Northumberland. Obviously, the government is very keen to get back onto probably feels like the more comfortable territory at the moment of speaking about the jabs rollout and the prospect of getting millions more people jabbed to protect them from COVID this winter.
Well, I mean, Harry, he doesn't want to be tarnished or any more tarnished with this, does he? But you do say it's the PM's chicken run for the sleaze debate, mocked over Commons swerve. Why should he be there, in your view?
Well, because basically this is a completely unforced own goal. If you think a week ago to when the PM quite unexpectedly really decided to throw the full weight and protective arm of the government machine around a backbencher who'd been found by not only his peers in Parliament, by his own Conservative colleagues to have broken the rules around lobbying many, many times. And yet the PM, put the protective arm around him, wasted a huge amount of political capital to try and defend Owen Paterson, only to then pull the plug on it 24 hours later when he realised it was going south. So I think, Tory MPs were lining up today to say that they deserved an explanation, maybe even an apology, for them putting their reputations on the line, defending the indefensible. Now, the PM could have got to this debate. There's no doubting that. We went round the houses at our lobby briefings today on this fact, and we all remember the hoo-ha last week, the fact that the Prime Minister last Friday managed to get on a plane and fly all the way from Glasgow back to London, got back very quickly. He has the full disposal of the RAF when he wants it, and today he decided to take the train all the way back from Northumbria, and even then he probably could have made the end of the debate had he wanted to, but it's obviously he's left it to his underlings to take the flak as he desperately scrambles to move on.
Yeah, not even the leader of the House, but the quote that's been picked up that's in your story here, Sir Keir Starmer accusing the Prime Minister of leading his party through the sewers, and the stench lingers, which makes the front two of the Guardian. Is this resonating, do you think, now, Pippa? Do people sit there and think, God, this is back to the sort of the end of major days. I mean, one of my first jobs as a reporter at Sky was sitting in the home of one of those Tory MPs who'd been accused of the brown envelope. So, is it back to those days? Is that what people are thinking?
Well, I think it's resonated from the off, and I'm sure Harry's the same, but I spoke to Tory MPs last week after the debate who were getting dozens of emails from their constituents complaining about, first of all, about the fact that the Prime Minister was attempting to get Owen Paterson off the hook, but then secondly, when he U-turned, that it was too late and that they had caused chaos. And that he has refused to apologise since then. Whether or not it's back to 90s levels of sleaze, I don't think we're quite at that point yet. We haven't ended up with ministers MPs being thrown into jail yet. Although the government is fighting on several fronts. It's not just obviously the Owen Paterson case. There's all sorts of questions in the papers today about MPs with second jobs, which obviously primarily affects the Conservatives, but not exclusively. There was the row over the weekend about Tory peerages for big donors, and the SNP have written to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner today, asking them to investigate. And then there's a whole sort of rows over Tory contracts, over COVID contracts rather. They're fighting it off on several fronts, which is why it looks particularly cowardly that the PM didn't come and face questions today, as Harry said, left it to his underling, Steve Barclay, who issued a sort of fairly muted apology, although several Tory backbenchers stood up and said, Mark Harper, former chief whip amongst them, saying, politics is a team sport, and if the captain makes a mistake, he needs to be able to apologise and front up for that. And I think that pressure is not going to go away from the Prime Minister just because he was up in Northumberland. It certainly seems to be cutting through in terms of the polls. There was one poll today, Ipsos Mori, which found that his personal ratings have slumped to the lowest levels, personal approval ratings, since he entered number 10. And for the first time since the vaccine rollout, the Tories have pulled ahead of Labour just by 1 point, just still in the margin of error, and it is just one poll, but it does reflect a sort of a slipping in the polls for the Conservatives over the last few days. So, I don't think this row is over yet. I think there's still plenty to come. And I think that the Prime Minister hiding away rather than facing up to it isn't going to have done him any favours.
Yeah, he's been the Teflon politician for so many years, hasn't he, Harry? And the question, I suppose, lingering for some people, raised, I guess, in The Guardian too, is was he saving former Minister Owen Paterson or was he saving himself? The Guardian pointing out that the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, Catherine Stone, is set to rule within weeks on a potential investigation into whether Boris Johnson properly declared the funding of this flat as an MP, loaned by a Tory donor to make over his Downing Street flat. So all of that is rumbling. Plus the Daily Mail, when you start to see how much some MPs are making, something you also touched on in your Page 2 article as well, actually, not least Geoffrey Cox, who seems to be doing OK.
Yeah, a great day for Geoffrey Cox to announce to the world, thanks to a perfectly timed update to the Register of Members' Interests this morning that shows he signed up for a new £400,000 a year part-time job. And the Mail report tomorrow that while he's been doing lots of his legal work outside of Parliament, while Parliament's sitting, he's been doing it from the Caribbean as well. So I suspect he will become a focal point now as the opposition parties desperately try to make this row carry on. We're a bit of a reprieve for Downing Street and the fact that Parliament's going back into yet another recess this week. So MPs go away from the Commons. There's less opportunities to stir things up there. But crucially, they'll go back to their constituencies and we really will find out how much this is cut through, as they say. Look, obviously, you've got to look at the fact that Keir Starmer has been looking for an in, as you say, to try and dent this Teflon politician for so long, and he thinks he's onto something here. There was an element, I think, perhaps a sniff of him overplaying his hand a little bit on this one. He's come out, he's been locked up in isolation with COVID himself for 10 or so days. He's really come out and hit the ground running, but he's coming out with increasingly louder proclamations of corruption and doom, and you just want to think, hang on, softly catch your monkey here. If he overplays his hand, it ends up being a bit of a shouting match that people will zone out of. So we shall see. Time will tell. And as Pippa touched on there, actually, it might be just actually a sort of return to sort of politics as normal at this stage in the cycle, because the Tories would have been riding high for the better part of a year on this so-called vaccine bounce. You know, the last time that Labour were ahead in the polls was when there was last November, when there's all sorts of questions about why we're going to go back into lockdown, why we're not going back into lockdown. Then ultimately we went back into lockdown. So whether these things are just slightly returning to normal now, we'll have to wait and see. As Pippa said, it's one poll, but it's certainly keeping us busy.
Indeed so. Very quick look at the Matt cartoon as well. It's ironic light touch as ever. If we can see it. There we go. Yes. So Matt continuing to make light of it, but plenty more still to come in the next part of our programme, including that huge rescue operation which saves an explorer crushed by a boulder, reports the Daily Mail. We'll have more on that. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now are the Daily Mirror's political editor, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Welcome back to both of you. And Harry, a very important story in the Daily Telegraph, which is what we always knew, but this is obviously the latest figures, the numbers of people who caught COVID in hospital and subsequently died. And this, you know, really is difficult for those families, is it not? What happened to those people?
Yeah, this is a sort of nightmare scenario, really, isn't it? The reason that there is such a backlog is people were feared going into hospital, avoided doctors, avoided A&Es for this very reason. And this is a really good crack at the Telegraph's investigations team. So a cynic might note that they have not put any of the Owen Paterson or sleaze stuff on the front, having been Owen Paterson's biggest defender in the media for the last week or so. But we'll leave that aside because it is an important story in the fact that they've FOI'd all the various trusts to find out, try and have a good crack at finding out just how many people did have that nightmare scenario of going into hospital with something completely different, catching COVID and then crucially dying. And this is the sort of story, retrospective stories we'll see, and I imagine will all form part of a long looming sort of public inquiry into COVID. But a very good crack at the first attempt at getting that number.
Yes, 11,688 people who died on wards after testing positive were likely to have caught the virus there, accounting for 1 in 8 COVID deaths in hospital. As you say, it'll come out in the public inquiry, no doubt. Very quick one, front of the FT on Obama, Pippa?
Yes, well, Barack Obama was in Glasgow today for the COP26 summit. Quite unusual on several levels. First of all, a former president turning up at a summit like this. Secondly, the rock star welcome that he received from the crowds. He truly is a politician who seems to have got the public, certainly in Glasgow anyway, on his side. He criticised one of his predecessors, Donald Trump, and his climate scepticism. That was also unusual, really speaking convention, even if it is Donald Trump. And he also overtly criticised China and Russia for not turning up at the summit and doing their bits. I mean, it was quite striking watching him earlier how much of, what a great orator he is compared to his immediate successors, both of them, and really all politicians. He's able to stand up there, and he was really punchy and sort of, really speak to people and move them. And I think COP could do with a bit more of that from politicians right across the globe if they're trying to inspire certainly young people. He seems to have done that.
Yeah, he always tapped in, didn't he, to that. Let's just show you the final story. We'll talk about it more a little bit later, which is this extraordinary rescue, which we're now told by the South and Mid Wales cave rescue team has resulted in the longest stretcher carry in British cave rescue history. The caver stuck for 2 days, the Mail tells us. Huge rescue operation to save the explorer who was crushed by a boulder. Still not a lot of detail about that. We'll certainly try and find out more. But Harry and Pippa, thank you both.